Hola!
Good morning, everybody.
My room is
Welcome to Still Podcast, Small Talk is Lame, with your host Sierra and
I really Brandon.
Brandon. Very nice. Today, we're going to be talking about Pandora's paradox, feeling alone in crowded spaces. Brandon and I were
Do you
brainstorming this
feel alone,
topic.
Sarah?
Oh, personally, I don't actually like. That was a funny take. Um, yeah, no, I don't actually feel alone in crowded spaces because I feel like my mindset around community and where I place myself in the world is very much um I would say in line with myself. Like I know who I am, I know who I'm looking for, I know what I'm looking for, I know what I'm trying to do. So I actually don't really have an experience too much of feeling alone in these communities. But the difference here is I think Brandon actually has a lot to talk about when it comes to feeling lonely in communities. And I'm sure my template is not the only one. His is not the only one. I'm sure there's a lot of gray area in the middle. So today we're going to unpack how this can happen and our thoughts on it and our experiences. And yeah, welcome aboard, everybody.
Yeah, buckle up. It's going to be a socially bonding ride. I'm just kidding. No, I think this is a very touchy subject, especially as of late, considering what we're not those people that we're going to mention the elephant in the room, but there's going to be a lot of social loneliness around communities and things like that. I feel like that are approaching our social condition. But um, why we thought this was important for us to talk about is because, I don't know, as we have gone through this entire plateau around connection and community and digital distance and things like that, it's like, well, what happens when, you get in this group and you're like, oh my God, I love these are my people, and da da da, and then all of a sudden something happens. A
Mm.
conversation, a topic, a justification, a revolutionary collective feeling where you're no longer the sheep. You are now the wolf or the weird black unicorn. Then what does that look like? How do you feel? And what are some of the things that we have experienced, or we would love to hear what people have experienced where they're like, I thought this was my people and this was not my people. It was X for my poison. So that's kind of what I was really thinking that this would be a cool thing. And it's like Pandora's box. Like you
Oh
get
yeah.
in there and you're like, what the hell did I just sign up for? It's kind of, I don't want to say the word cult, but like,
Yeah, could be. When we were talking about this beforehand, off camera and stuff, just getting our thoughts together, we I think we broke it down into like two major components. So there are probably like the first major one would be people who already have some sort of essence of loneliness, whether they're looking for a social interaction, they're looking for purpose, they're looking for a connection, whatever it might be. Those people who are not in like a community or a group or something yet, and that loneliness or that whatever feeling that is drives them to a community. And then on the other half, you've got people who are already in a community, and then there's like a disconnect that starts to happen regardless of what it is. Something happens, and then you start to feel disconnected, lonely, or whatever, insert adjective here, right? So let's start. I think we should talk about like how we think that people first find themselves wandering in and trying to find these communities, trying to find these this social connection, because I think that's really what it is. It's social connection. What do you think?
I think, I think, I think it's as early as we start to feel emotions and maybe expose ourselves to other groups of people. I remember even for me, even as a young, I remember in high school, middle school, joining the art club was the group and community that I went to because I felt like I fit in there versus fitting in with maybe where like just in school I didn't really fit in with everybody, but I know in art club I fit in with everybody. So I wanted to find something where I was just me without disguise or disruption or some minimalism. So I think we as people alone sometimes go to these communities because we just want one place where we can truly be accepted in one area of ourselves. Like I'm an artist. I want to be around other artists. Like I don't want to be around a bunch of just if I'm a painter. It doesn't make sense for me to kind of connect with those people, even though we're all creators, but that's not my vibe. So I think belongingness was one of the big things that I saw in my research is like why we all need that kind of social interaction because we want to belong somewhere. And I feel like that's what I think is important is like that sense of belonging because it sucks being alone in the world.
Yeah. No, for sure. It's funny because my experience is just different. Um, so I didn't
Yeah,
really grow
because
up with the time to be searching out for these places to connect and all that stuff. I worked from a very young age, from like 5 until I was about 12. Um, it was all work, 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 and if it wasn't work, it was school. And I don't think it was until I was in college, right in my late teenage years, that I finally was able to take a breath. But then it was still school. I definitely had priorities. Like I wanted to learn how to dance, and I wanted to further some skills. I was in martial arts. I was doing these things, so I was busy. I didn't necessarily seek out community, which was interesting. And I don't, you know me, I don't have a whole lot of friends, so I felt like I was just self-reliant from the start, and I was okay being alone, and I really didn't bother me that much. And then after I went from being all that busy, I straight joined the Navy. And then it's almost like you're forced into a community when that happens because last episode we talked about how community is best formed when everyone's uniting around a common goal, you know? And when you join the military, that's what it is. That's your job is to do that. You get paid to do that. So then you become part of the blob, if you would. And so everything kind of just shifts and changes. um, on the ship, I didn't really have a community. I had some people that I liked. I had some people I hung out with. I had friends, and when you were on the ship, you were doing stuff, and when you weren't on the ship, you were sleeping. So that was my life for 5 years for that. And then now I feel like it's all more of the same. I don't really have a sense of community. I just have friends. And that's new. That's a fun experience, but I just choose to hang out with people that I connect with, but we don't necessarily have a community per se. And I keep my life very streamlined, and it's simple that way, and I like it. But I mean, I would argue we're trying to build a community here, still podcast. Besides that, but I mean, so of course that's like
I was like, there's a community, Miss Niam. Um, it's funny because in the whole spectrum of the science around loneliness or why the human condition does not thrive in solitary or just one with the world. Some of it's psychological, some of it's emotional, some of it's economical. There's all these reasons why we all come together as a human being or human species. I think it's interesting to hear that, even after you were no longer in a place where that access was not even an option for you, that you were like, I'm so good, thanks. Like you're like, even though I was raised with just as being homeschooled and I really had a lot more different experiences around exposure, peer pressure, this, that, and the other, even after all that, you were still like, even though you're like, oh look, these are all the things that I could now do, you're like, no thanks, I'm good. I'm curious as to where, like, in some of those psychological thought processes, like, you didn't want to belong to anybody. You're like, no, I'm good, thanks. You're cool, but I'm gonna go over there.
I guess for me it wasn't that I was trying to distance and like I don't want this, I don't want that, I'm good, I'm good, I'm
Yeah.
good.
Mhm.
It wasn't any of that. I guess I just had a strong sense of independence. I didn't feel, like when I wanted something, I went after it. If I was looking for like a romantic connection, I knew what I needed in that lane, and I could pursue that.
Mhm.
And eventually I met my husband, and we're amazing right now. So like that's checking the box. That's fine. If I wanted something social after work, if I wanted to do this, if I wanted to do there was just I was very good at compartmentalizing my needs, and then I would drive and like go after them, and I would satisfy it, and I guess I was just very efficient, but I wasn't really immersed in a community. I've never been part of like a huge group herd, other than I think in the military. And I think part of the reason for that is I tend to sort of be like the black unicorn, like you said earlier. I
Mhm.
always seem to be the one that is disconnected because I'm always looking for goal. I'm looking for intent. I'm looking for purpose. I'm looking for these things. And then if I see something and I see that there's like a group formed around it, it's like, oh, cool. And then I'll just drive. I'll just go. I'll head towards that aim. It's like, we're trying to do this. Let's do this. And then everyone else around me is like, we're not that serious. And so then it's like,
Um,
oh, you're saying one thing and doing another. Okay. And then there's no value to that for me. And so I go, okay, next. Like I just move on. No hard feelings. It's like I think that's really what it was.
it's so funny that yet again I'm going to bring up this story. Perfect example from if anybody doesn't have, if you're new to our show, if you're new to what we're doing here, season one, I talk about how Sierra and I like met. And to her point, because I love to make sure we call to action, Sierra is literally the person who was like, we talked about this idea, we met in a group setting, and we are like, this would be a really cool podcast idea. And then I started talking about logistics and things like just preliminary things that I would do just in my thought process. And I shit you not, people, she was like, okay. She called me like the next, like that day on Monday when I said, oh, let's talk on Monday and da da da. Now, I know in my mind I was not doing lip service. I had already approached this conversation with someone else previously about like, let's do a podcast, da da da. And it didn't go anywhere. And here she was on the dot, on the nine, like, so, what about the podcast? And that was like her legit thing of being like, when she says she wants something, she goes after it. Now, the funny thing about how this ties into the topic of loneliness and being within a community, I think Sierra, you have to be the weird bird in the room here because I have not met many people who are like, I will go after, like, if I want to be in our club, I will go find an art club. I won't wait for an art club to pop up. I will go find one or I will, and that I almost, is it safe to say that you'll make one?
100%. Well, and
Like,
I think
okay,
that's sort of that's how when I was breaking this stuff down, I think the biggest as far as like for people who are, let's make it simple, people who are already in the community. I think the number one disconnect, or sorry, the number one cause for disconnect, maybe like in general, of course I'm generalizing here, is when people have perceptions or things that they think that they want, whether they know that or not. There is certain perceptions that might be in place, and then somehow that is not getting met. You know, like there's some kind of dissonance there. Whether they joined for one reason, and then they realize when they got there, they're like, oh, actually, I needed this. And then maybe now that
like,
community
okay.
goal, you know? And it doesn't have to be anybody's fault. It could just be like maybe you didn't even know what you needed coming in and you were just kind of flying by the seat of your pants and you're like, this looks cool, and you go in and then things aren't what you need. And I think that's okay. And the problem I think is when people um there is a like when they know that you're saying one thing and doing another and then you choose to not change and you still want to be part of this community and it's not fruitful. Like I think that's one of the big disconnects.
I feel like it's a huge disconnect. I also think it's a double-edged sword because where did that mutation happen? Is it because when a person who is feeling lonely finds a sense of belonging and connection, and then that connection then shorts, or it's like, this was not what I thought it was, does that then reactivate, if not exacerbate, that person's loneliness again to where now they either become a chameleon and compromise to be in a community just to feel the element of belonging, or that self identity change? It's almost like everyone's drinking purple. If you drink red, you're going to hear about it more times than you can think and be ostracized for it. But if as soon as you drink purple, no matter who you are, what you're doing, people are like, oh yeah, he's purple, so he's cool, knowing damn well that you're allergic to purple, I guess, basically.
Well, I would argue, and perfect example. Why would you stay there? Why would you intentionally try to blend in and make a shoe fit that's 3 sizes too small when you know you're smashing your toes rather than stepping out of the shoe to try to find one that fits? To me, that doesn't make
Because
any
the
sense.
premise of loneliness, of course, to a person who's like, I would rather find my own conviction, it doesn't make sense to you. But I'm thinking about the people who are like, I don't like walking around here with one shoe, period, but I'll put on these two small purple shoes to walk with other people at the sacrifice of my own loneliness. So I feel like that's what I think this whole concept around the psychological component and then like the belongingness is almost like, again, we talked about this in episode one. Really know who you are before you start messing around trying to fit in with facilities and factions. Like, if I'm not saying everyone needs to go out and be like a Sierra 2.0, but I am saying like have some kind of identity of where these are non-negotiables. The moment you see a flag or a fault line within a community that you get to know, don't stay. Like, that's how hate gets brewed. That's how Stockholm gets brewed. That's how, I don't know, brainwashing gets brewed. Like, I don't know. I feel like that's when bad things happen to good people.
Well, here's another thing, because you said, know yourself before you jump in. I don't think that's necessary. I think that helps. I think 100% that's valuable,
It does
right?
help.
But let's think about people who are, geez, I don't know, early 20s, straight out of college. Do they know who they are? No. So it's okay to bumble around.
They would beg to differ. They would beg to differ with you.
Well, I'm just saying, worst case scenario, you don't know who you are, right? And then
Oh
maybe
yeah.
maybe you're that, maybe you're not. And if you go
Hmm.
around and search and find things, and this is where I think people need to just be um, aware, and they have to be cognizant and present in the moment. And so if you stumble on something and you like it for a little bit and you realize it's no longer meeting your needs, ask yourself why. And then if you need to stay in that group for a little bit until you find something else, that's fine. But then don't sacrifice who you are or what you want to do. Like it's okay to walk around in the two shoes for a little bit because you're looking for something else and then slip into both as soon as you're done. I think it's totally okay. And the problem is when people either don't want to change or they're not aware enough to realize when they're in a situation that's no longer doing them any good or in a community that's no longer serving the purpose they need. You have to be willing to
Hmm.
change. And if you're bumbling around blind while you do it, but then you end up in the right place, that's fine. But you have to be aware through the whole process. I think that's the really important part. And there is some bravery that is required to do that. And I think you'll get to know yourself more along that process, you know? And it's hard, but I think that's probably an ideal way to do it.
Yes. Can we time out really quick? Because two
Yeah.
things I want to ask, two questions. A, do you feel like we're like really lighting this topic on fire?
Lighting it on fire? What do you mean?
Like compared
Like,
to our first episode to this one, I'm like, do you feel like we're like at the same volume with this topic? I honestly feel somewhat underprepared.
oh,
I
underprepared?
do, and that's on me.
But why do
Yeah.
you feel underprepared? Tell me.
Because feeling alone in a crowded space is a topic, but we're talking about all the components around the psychology around loneliness. And then at no point, I feel like, I don't know. I feel like we're all over the place. And I'm like, ugh. Our other episode was so clean, and I feel like I just doing all this jumble. I don't know. Take it
Tell me what
easy.
you would like to pick up. Tell me where you feel like your last route was where you felt confident, and let's go from there.
Feeling alone in the crowded space, I feel like sometimes it's not so much in community. I feel like it's why we go to communities that make us feel that so we don't feel alone in crowded spaces. So maybe that's the narrative I want to pick it up from.
Okay.
Because,
So,
Pandora's paradox is when you go like actually better yet, Sierra, like what happens when you have gone into like situations in the military where you were the only woman at in that unit at the time or in that situation or scenario? Oh, remember that story you told me when you went to China or Thailand, and you were
Singapore?
like, I'm the only yeah, when you were the only woman in that environment, and you're like, something's about to go. I'm about to get
Oh yeah.
hostile, kidnapped.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like
Okay.
that feeling. Like it's like that's what I'm getting with like feeling alone like that. We're like, what do I do? Like,
Okay. That's I would like to draw a very distinct tie to that.
mhm.
So you just asked me to bring up a story where I intentionally, against better judgment, put myself in a place where I was actually in danger when it came to human trafficking because I had been deployed for like
Oh
6 months. You just went out the window.
yeah,
And then, no,
yeah.
but hold on, there's a point here. I think that's actually really important that you then liken that feeling to how you feel in a community where you feel disconnected. That's is that true?
Or why I would join a community so I never felt that disconnected again. Because I want to take it to the
Oh,
place
sorry.
of saying, if we're talking about the fabrics of community, and feeling alone, if you never wanted to feel like that ever again, you would surround yourself with those like-minded people of belongingness, of safety, of awareness, to say, this is what could happen in a lonely situation. But as a collective, as a community, this prevents more of that.
But does
That
it?
it
Like, is
could.
that
I mean, I feel like I mean, from the moment we were kids, it's almost like the buddy system was a thing. And I feel like that's the same thing when you're feeling alone in a crowded space. Sometimes having a buddy or having a group of people that were like minded, that were, um, they gave you a sense of connection, were the things that kind of kept you out of harm's way.
okay? Sure. I like
Does that make
I'm
sense?
not saying that that doesn't work. But
Mm.
is that, should that be the template? Like are
Because
we can be okay by ourselves temporarily. And I put
one
myself in
thousand
this.
percent,
Okay, okay.
yeah. But when a person is out wandering the world and they walk into every room alone,
Mhm.
isn't it that that great feeling when they find their people? When you find that group of people, they're like, "Oh my god, I don't feel so alone in this world," or "I just don't feel so guarded to protect myself from the world because I don't like it's not like-minded individuals like myself."
I mean, absolutely. I totally
And that's what the
understand
sense of community.
how much of a relief that could be. Yeah, finally being
Yeah,
able to um connect with other people, you know. Um but can I ask you just as a like a caveat, do
yeah.
you do you feel incomplete when you're alone?
Oh no, I don't feel incomplete. So I guess what I'm saying is this is like feeling alone and feeling whole are two different things. Because sometimes when I'm feeling alone means that I have a moment in which I want to express or share, and sometimes you can't express your joy to yourself because it's your, you know, who do you call when you want to give that great news to somebody? Who do you want to? I don't know. Like sometimes it feels better to sometimes share some good, bad, and different things with the collective versus trying to hold it onto yourself.
Yeah.
That can get really heavy really fast. And that's what I think. That's what I think I'm trying to say here.
Okay. No, I think all of that is fair. Yeah, 100%.
And
So
again, this is why I feel like the topic is so unclear. I feel unprepared because I'm like,
yeah,
I didn't really think of this through.
yeah. No, so here's why I was saying earlier when we were making this outline and doing all these things. Like this topic is huge. It is so broad. And that's why I thought it was sort of a good idea to generalize it into two separate things: loneliness before community and loneliness in. And it sounds like you definitely want to focus more on loneliness before. So, if I could talk from personal experience, whenever I felt like I was missing something in my life, if I felt like, get like wanting that connection, right? Because there were definitely times where I was like, man, ugh, I just don't want to be like by myself. I wish I could go do this. I wish I could go do that. A lot of times it was just because of external factors. I was just exasperated from work. I was this, I was that. And I can't deny the fact that there would be some major relief and some like awesomeness that would come from having people around me. However, I did not seek out a group. I would often find myself looking for certain people, and it could probably start that
Mm.
way. I think the thing that probably separates me from others is most people they have friends, and then if they want more connection, they can go to a group. Whereas I didn't have a whole lot of friends, so even having just
Uh,
one or two
okay.
enough. So I came from a more tight knit.
Selective unified front.
Well, I just I went from I don't want to say less because I don't like that word, but I basically went from just me to like a one step more still minimalist. Just a couple people, and then the group for me can often be exasperating because I prefer the feeling of the tight knit unity that I get from one or two or three people rather than the sort of dysfunctional chaos of all these different personalities in a large group. And so I was very satisfied with just having a couple key people in my life. And that was enough for me. And then I think where you're
So
coming from. Oh, go ahead.
no, I think there's this whole thing about social bonding and like the bonding hormone. So you're like, I only need three. I don't need 30. I just need three little bonding transmitters, and that's all I really need. I don't need an audience. And I sometimes think that that can kind of relate to people and maybe deeper elements of why they are uncomfortable in their own loneliness, which is why they need an audience, why people need to have that massive group of friends. I mean, think about social media. People who are like, I've got 5,000 friends. Remember that was a thing where people were like, oh my God, you have 5,000 friends.
Hmm. I
Like,
do.
that I think is a perfect example of like, there's a perfect example of people not wanting to feel alone. But I'm like, that means jack diddly squat. And then it changed. Now it's like, good for you. You got 5,000 friends. Do you know half of them?
Yeah. Half. Do you know
Yeah.
98% of them? 98% of like 5,000. That's a lot, you know. I think the reality is that people there's a balance, right? I think
Yeah.
this is where like the term community gets really messy. So, feeling alone in crowded spaces, this the name of this episode. To me, when we first started talking about that, the first thing I thought of was a party, you know, feeling alone in a crowded space, where you kind of are on face terms with most of these people, you know their names, maybe some that you don't, and you have very good personal ties to a handful. And so when you walk
Mhm.
in there's a good chance you might talk to most of these people, but you only know like a couple. And so feeling lonely, I think that could happen very easily when those couple people are all caught up in conversations or tasks or something, then you cannot connect with them directly. And now you're forced to be in with the swath of people that are at this party. For me, that's like always how that happens, right? And so I have to force myself to be outgoing, and then I could
Well,
strike.
that's kind of how we met.
Exactly. So like that. So feeling alone in crowded spaces, my first initial thing was like, oh, like a party. And then when we start bringing that in towards community, I don't quite know if that's I mean, I'm sure that it happens, but again, I think this calls back to like needs not being met, whether you were aware that those were your needs or not. I think you have to be able to step into those big boy, big girl shoes and understand where you need to walk. And then going back to looking for a community, Brandon, what were some things that besides you mentioned art club, but how about because when you're a kid, I almost don't even want to like your life and you are so fluid as a child. I don't think it's fair to use anything before age 20 something as an example, honestly.
Ah, I beautifully disagree because I was that weird kid. So I'll give you an example. Um, unlike my cousins and even twin sister, did not gravitate towards the same trends that they did. Even as kids. Like I'll use the corniest example ever in the world. I remember when I wanted red Converses and they wanted Jordans or Fila or something super trendy in the moment of that time, right? And I was like, I want these. boy, can I tell you the fact that like feeling alone in a crowded space is being the kid in the white Converses, in a predominantly driven arena or
Well,
Jordans
sorry, maybe I wasn't clear.
or
I'm not
Jordans
saying
sneakers.
that
Okay.
um I'm not saying that you there was no way you felt lonely as a kid. What I'm saying is
Mm.
as an adult, let's stick to more adult examples. What were some times when you were like you were lonely and you were looking for a community, and what steps did you find yourself taking as an adult after having already experienced some life and done some things and been around the block? Like what let's do an overview of a time that sticks out in your mind when you were looking for a community due to loneliness. And then let's walk through some of those steps, like what you were looking for, how it went when you found it, what were some things in the beginning that you noticed, stuff like that. Is any of that coming to mind?
I mean, there's two sides to that. One, I mean, one's like personal around my mental health and things like that. That was when I was trying to find like-minded individuals who went through or go through or struggle with the same areas that I would have, that were relatable. And it wasn't until one day in a group that someone said the exact same thing that I had experienced verbatim. And I was like, oh, it completely changed the involvement, the perspective, the worry, and all the internal stuff that you go through when you do feel alone in a crowded space. It completely went away. Now, the hard part about it was that what I did go through and realize is like, though I didn't feel alone, I did not feel like um, though it was shared. Not I didn't. I felt something change, like to where my individuality, my sense of self, did diminish a little bit. Then I became part of a collective. Then I wasn't unique. Just like you're like you're in person. I'm my own individual. But when you hear another like-minded individual go through the exact same you know path or mantra or experience as you're like, well then, huh? It was really hard for me to kind of walk through that originally. So yes, I can see how yes, when you feel alone in a crowded space, but then what happens when that crowded space does make you feel alone? Are you still you, or are you now a part of the group? Like that was the weird fight that I had, and that's when I became disconnected from that group again.
Oh, so you had like a weird slingshot reaction. Did I get that right? So
Yeah.
you
Hmm.
felt alone. You tried joining something. You found someone who had a very identical, I won't say the same, but like you had it was close enough that it
It
was like,
connected. It was like
yeah, it was like Twilight Zone, And then that probably messed with your sense of self a little bit. And then because of that, you felt the need to distance? Or did that happen because, like,
it
why did that happen exactly? Why do
it
you
made
think?
it harder to still feel like so the next like a couple more times of reoccurring within that community where you I felt like I belonged. I
Mhm.
started to feel like I didn't. It sounds really weird, but it sounded like I was like, this doesn't feel familiar anymore. I don't feel as if it is connecting me to something bigger. I feel like it's just crowded me in. It's like being shoved into the bus with everybody going to the same place in the same back. So there, that sense that in a community, I still expect to grow. Still expect to be challenged. I still expect to be um, working on the internals of myself within a collective group of like-minded people. But in that moment, it stopped. Something stopped where I could not access those like mental nutrients to kind of keep growing. So then I was like, okay, well, never mind. I'm
Yeah,
just
and
dying in this greenhouse of thought. So
I think that's a great example of what I was talking about earlier. When, whether or not you know this, you come into a group with certain expectations. I think you probably had some unspoken needs that maybe you didn't even know yourself until you got met with that situation, and you realized it. And then the result of that was you're like, oh, actually, all these people are doing one thing. And it was cool. I had a moment of connection. There was a spark, but now they are no longer on the same trajectory that I actually realized that I need. And then you felt that separation again. And that's exactly what I said at the beginning, is
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
needs
That
not being
separation led to loneliness
expectations.
immediately.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Expectations not being met, whether or
And
not
that's
you
what
even
worse.
those expectations. Go ahead.
I feel it's worse when you don't know they're not being met, and then that reality has to hit you in the face. I feel like that creates a much harder experience to break through to ever do it again or to ever go back into the sense of thing like I would just then be alone in the world. I'd rather than just be um, not a part of the social learning and the culture. I'd rather not be about the shared knowledge and the collectiveness around it because it's such a devastating reality when you are met with this was never what it was meant to be. So is it a lie? You know, it's like you start to question like those elements of community again
Mhm.
all the time. It happens. So yeah, that was really yeah. That's a moment.
Well, if we're
That's
gonna
a
take
moment.
a little tidbit from my martial arts journey, some I would say in general in life, it's it's not always about um, what you do when times are good. It's more like how you react when things are bad, you know? And so if
Mm-hmm.
you got met with this difficult situation, it's more important to try to, focus on not necessarily focus on the positives, but like, okay, this happened. Cool. How can I react to it? How can I do this? How can I do that? And I not it's a really hard life lesson to learn, especially if you came in and you didn't know that you even had these expectations. All of a sudden you're met with this reality of yourself that you didn't even realize, and then all these needs are not being met, you know? And there's I would say
Mm-hmm.
how you handle that is more important than the fact that you even got yourself in that situation to begin with. Because if you don't know, how are you like? It's silly to beat yourself up over things like that. Like if I'm in a sparring match and I'm tired and my reaction time is a little bit off, and I get hit with a jab a couple times, I can either get mad that I keep getting hit in the face, or I can be like, oh, I need to learn from this. This person's trying to tell me something. I need to put up my guard, or I need to go to the side, or I need to there's ways that you can deal with it. But being in my head and going, God, I'm such a bad fighter, all that doesn't help, you know. And I think people often get
No, I
caught.
think negative talk. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. I think that loneliness can sometimes lead into legions of negative self-talk. It can lead into complete dismissal of how those communities or connections can save you from that or heal you from those. Um, and that's what this topic, like you're right, this topic is so multifaceted and has so many prisms of perception. But I think for this kind of thought process, you're right. I would say to anybody who's going through the process of finding the people of their community and they are disappointed in what they have experienced, it does not take away the opportunity to experience something but more in tune with who you want and what you're looking for and your needs, as you said. Like getting your needs met does not mean that you're going to have to fail or hurt to get them met. You can turn into being Sierra and be like, I only will settle for groups or communities that do this. I'm not going to just take it for face value or for the sake of what their sign says. That's just not how I'm going to roll. And then sometimes it takes some of that resilience for us to kind of go through. Like sometimes we have to be punched in the jaw so many times. Like, if you don't lean, you are not going to have a faith anymore. Um, and I think I've gone through that too. I think I've had to learn how to handle myself in a community or action or result of something that I could or cannot control. And if I could control it and I still controlled it, like I was trying to go north, but I wasn't paying attention and I ended up going south the whole time, all I can do is be like, Brandon, stop the car, turn around and go. But cursing out every fucking driver and driving all the way on the road and crashing the car is not going to change the fact that you went the wrong way. And I feel like that's what sometimes these communities go through when someone's like, I'm in the wrong line. Instead of just getting your ass out of the line and getting the wrong line, they create these levels of disruption, and then everything's all fucked up. And
Hmm.
that's, yeah.
And that's like that's definitely one half of the coin. But then to circle back, I think there's also something to be said about communities that let's just say that you are looking for group support for whatever reason, group support, a community for business or for like I would even consider probably something as small as like a running club. Like my husband loves being part of the run club, right? And if you had this is a good example because it's like very black and white. What would happen if he joined a running club that had this, it was a good presence on a social media platform where they're always trying to coordinate and be like, okay, we're going here this day, we're going here this day, it's going to be this many miles, we're going to do donuts after. We're like, that all sounds really great. And then he's like, oh, they're active. Yeah, I want to join that one. And then when he shows up to the place and time that they said they were going to be at, this group of 50 is now like one or two. And then those people already kind of feel he can get the sense of them being like, oh, they're put out, they're the only ones in the group that actually run, and all these other people are posers, or maybe they only do it sometimes, or maybe they only do the shorter ones when my husband wants to do longer ones. Like that's happened. And so I think um there's also probably a lot of good intentions when you're looking for community, and then maybe you stumble on one that's not following up their words with the actions that would match it. And then when you get hit with that, that's kind of rude, and you're like, ugh, and that leaves a bad taste in your mouth. So I think there's this is why I think it comes back to the individual every time. If you're going to start a community, make sure that everyone's actually in alignment behind a goal and that people are backing up their words with their actions. And if they're not, there needs to be some kind of intervention. And it's not always a get out kind of situation. It's a, hey, I need to meet you where you are right now. Here's where this community wants to be. Here's our goals. Here's what we would like to do. And I see that you're just the energy is not matching right now. What's going on? That's actually something that the military does. Let me rephrase. The military systematically has this written down on paper very well. The execution of it, neither here nor there. We have great intentions on paper as far as how we check in with people. Because, like I said, the military is one big community. When you join, you get paid to be part of this one giant mindset, and you have to be unified behind a common goal. And so, what happens is when we get service members, sailors, army people, doesn't matter. It's all roughly about the same. If the leadership is in tune and they start to notice that, let's say, a certain individual is coming in late to work all the time, they're missing muster points. They don't. They're like they're high risk for evolutions. Like there's a lot of mistakes made. They're not doing maintenance properly. Like there's all these little signals that you could see, right? And instead of after them and being like, we are going to punish you, or like in the civilian world, maybe, oh, we are going to ostracize you. You're no longer allowed here. You have to meet the individual and say, hey, what's going on? And a lot of the times when it comes to the military, at least, it's always stuff going on at home. My toddler's in the hospital. I'm going through a divorce. I just found out last night. My car got repoed. Like there's life, you know. Like I said, the military is just like such an oddball example. But the best thing that you can do when there's someone who's not meeting the overarching goal is you have to meet them where they are, figure out why, and then it could either be, not in the case of the military, but in the case of like a civilian community, maybe this isn't a good fit for you. Maybe you walked in and you didn't know your needs, and now you're kind of like, you got a bad taste, and maybe it's better if you leave. Maybe you need to go find something that actually meets what you need. Or maybe we can surround you and be helpful. Hey, you got your car repoed. I am so sorry to hear that. Do you need help getting to a place? Or can we meet in a different way that would allow you to walk to where we need to be? Or like you know what I mean, like there's all these things you could do to bring somebody up or to send them on their way to a place that could do them better service. And the problem is the mentality. Like I said, the military is not always the best at executing that kind of stuff, and I'm sure there's other people in the civilian world that would fall just as short because we're all human. Here's the thing, I think the people that are in charge of these communities, they always have to keep that mentality in mind. And that's part of like the culture war. you have to instill that from the bottom up grassroots. And it's important that everyone's on the same page, because then when these types of things happen, it's not a catastrophe. It minimizes damage and loss and risk to the individual, and then you can do what's best for them.
Right. Man, that sounds like that goes into so many arenas of performance and self-realization and, leadership versus, I mean, that's a whole another episode, I would say, because those are traits of what makes a person who is in a place of power or a place of focus or a place of guidance. Like, they should have that. Like, that's a clear identifier. It's being like, look, you need to be able to know when time to ship up, ship out, coach up, coach down, um, to stop, edit, revalue, compromise things that are responsible for collective, whether it's components of work, whether it's components of community, hell, whether it's tools and things to help build something forward. Like, you got to know when it's time to go or stay, regroup, I would
Right.
say.
Yeah, this episode
Yeah.
went a little all over the place. I feel like we touched on a couple different ones, actually. And that's okay.
Yeah, I honestly think, I do. I think we should probably pull this and find little tidbits, but I do probably think we should do a reshoot because I feel like I'm all over the place with this thought process. And I don't know, it's because once I got my ideology behind why I think loneliness is not a catalyst to, like, community is solvent that some people use to help with loneliness. It is not becoming lonely in a community.
Okay.
I think that happens afterwards. And I think, to your point, I think what it's not loneliness that happens, it's literally saying your needs were not met in this group. How do you not corrupt, catastrophize, or destroy that community's, center because you didn't get your needs met? Because I feel like that's the side that we didn't talk about. That's Pandora's box. Like, people who get in these groups, their needs aren't met, and they just completely destroy it. They erupt. They completely advocate and create adversity within it, and that's where I feel like my thought process was going in this narrative when I said, let's do Pandora's box.
Okay.
Not really
Well,
telling how to, and I have like 2 minutes left.
no, here's the deal. I think this episode was not a waste, and I think we don't need to reshoot this, because I'm sure if we're talking about creating the still community, we're not perfect. There's probably something that you said and something
That's
that
true.
I said that someone needs to hear. So I think we should probably do this as a part 1, part 2. So for all the viewers, whatever we just had in this episode, maybe it wasn't the most succinct, most streamlined message, but I think this was a great example of what
And
it
we
can
were
look like.
working on it.
Yeah, we're working on it. And this is a great example of what it looks like and how this is all what still community is about, keeping your ego out of it, modeling what it looks like to have these hard conversations, keeping an open mind and understanding when you're just in a different place and you're like, you know what? I came in this and I didn't even understand my own thought process on this. And that's okay. I don't hold that against Brandon. I don't hold none of that. This is a learning experience. And I
She
think
never does.
it's about the attitudes that we have when we're met with these situations. And so I think this was actually a great example of the still mindset. And I love this episode. I think it was fantastic. And we will do a part 2 that gets more into what Brandon was talking about after he did his realizations. And we will dive even more into what Pandora's box will be.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think you're right. As Sierra and I continue to amaze each other and develop the bond around our friendship, I still to this day am, this girl will never look at me like I'm crazy and be like, "Why is your head on backwards?" She'll never make me question my presentation of self, which always makes for great content, as you guys have seen. But I do think it's important, like, as we think about part 2, I mean, sometimes these topics come to us and we get really fired up about it, and then life happens, and then we start to really relive our memories with you guys on camera. And I think I did. I think I relived a couple memories of what sometimes feeling alone does, and how I conflated the two with being a community versus becoming of a community. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's a completely human and normal response. And who would we be to cut that out of our viewers? You know, this is part of the journey. And so we will be back for this episode. This should be releasing, I think, like next week. And so let's see,
Oh,
probably
before we go,
what?
Sarah has managed to put us on Apple Podcasts. We are on Apple Podcasts. We're on
iHeartRadio.
iHeartRadio now. We figured out the magical mazes. We'll have a shout out to someone if once we get approved for that. But we had help and it was amazing. And I'm grateful to that person. They know who they are. Thank you so much for getting us to that place. But now we're on all those additional platforms, which I think we'll try to get into the links below. But check us out if you iPhoners. Now you don't have any excuses.
Oh yeah. We'll be back probably right before Thanksgiving for part 2 of Pandora's Paradox.
Oh,
Until then,
that's right.
we'll see you
All
guys
right,
later.
turkey. Bye, guys.